The Galactic Council chamber fell silent when the distress signal played for the third time. Ambassador Velrix of the Karathi Collective watched the holographic display with cold, calculating eyes. The signal came from Nexus 7, a small mining colony on the edge of disputed space. 3,000 souls cried for help as the Void Swarm descended upon their world. "We cannot intervene," declared High Counselor Thrain, his silver robes flowing as he rose from his seat. "The risk to our fleets is too great. The Void Swarm has consumed 17 worlds in this sector alone. Nexus 7 is lost." The other council members nodded in agreement. The Velothi, ancient beings of pure energy, flickered their approval. The Krethoks, massive crystalline entities, hummed their consensus. The Sundari, tall and graceful with their flowing garments, bowed their heads in what they called practical wisdom. "But there are children there," protested a young delegate. "Families. Workers who trusted the council to protect them." Thrain's expression remained unchanged. "Civilization requires difficult choices. We preserve the many by sacrificing the few. This is the way of advanced species. This is the burden of enlightenment." The council voted unanimously to abandon Nexus 7. They sealed the sector, marking it as lost territory. They sent no ships, no soldiers, no aid. The mining colony would face the Void Swarm alone. On Nexus 7, mining supervisor Kira Vex stared at the communication screen in disbelief. The message from the Galactic Council was brief and final. No rescue would come. They were to make peace with their fate and face their end with dignity. "They left us to die," whispered her assistant, a young Karathi named Tellus. His forearms trembled as he processed the information. "The civilized races of the galaxy have abandoned us." Kira looked out the reinforced window at the approaching darkness. The Void Swarm moved like a living cloud of death across the horizon. Millions of creatures, each one a perfect killing machine designed by evolution to consume everything in their path. They would reach the colony within 6 hours. "There must be someone," she said, activating the emergency broadcast system. "Someone who will hear us." She sent the signal on every frequency, including the restricted ones. She violated 17 protocols and broke countless laws of the Galactic Council. She broadcast their coordinates, their situation, and their desperate plea for help to every corner of known space. The response came within 20 minutes, but not from any direction she expected. "This is the TSS Defiant of the Terran Navy. We have received your distress signal. Hold your position. We are coming." Tellus went pale. "The Terrans?" "They are savages, Supervisor. The Council classifies them as pre-Enlightenment primitives. They eat dead animal flesh. They engage in physical combat for entertainment. They reproduce through biological means and actually raise their offspring themselves. Their entire species is considered dangerous and unstable." Kira remembered the stories. Humanity had been discovered only a century ago, emerging from their small blue planet with barely functional spacecraft and primitive weapons. The Galactic Council had immediately classified them as Class 7 primitives, too aggressive and unpredictable to join civilized society. They were contained within their home system, forbidden from expanding, and largely ignored by the greater galaxy. Yet somehow, they had heard the signal, and somehow they were coming. "I would rather be saved by savages than die ignored by the civilized," Kira replied. The Terran fleet arrived 4 hours later. 12 ships emerged from faster-than-light travel with a violence that made the stars themselves seem to shake. They were ugly vessels by galactic standards, covered in exposed armor plating and bristling with weapons. They lacked the elegant curves of Sundari cruisers or the crystalline beauty of Krethoks vessels. They were built for one purpose: war. The flagship TSS Defiant took position between the colony and the approaching Void Swarm. Its captain, a scarred woman named Sarah Chen, appeared on the communication screens. She was small by Terran standards, with short dark hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. This is Captain Chun to all colony personnel. We are deploying ground forces to establish defensive positions. Evacuate all non-essential personnel to the underground shelters. Our transports will begin loading civilians in 30 minutes. Captain, Kira responded with surprise in her voice. The Void Swarm numbers in the millions. Your fleet is only 12 ships. The Galactic Council themselves declared this battle unwinnable. Captain Chun smiled, and there was something fierce in that expression. The Galactic Council has never seen Terrans fight. The first wave of the Void Swarm hit the defensive line like a tide of darkness. The creatures were nightmares made real, twisted forms of chitin and claw that had evolved on some hellish world to become perfect predators. They had destroyed entire civilizations, consumed worlds, and left nothing but silence in their wake. The Terran Marines met them with fire and steel. Sergeant Marcus Williams stood on the front line with his squad, their weapons blazing as the swarm approached. The colonists watched in stunned horror as these primitive humans charged forward instead of retreating. They saw Terrans fighting with a ferocity that no civilized species could comprehend. One Marine fell, pulled down by 3 creatures at once. His squad did not retreat. Instead, they pushed forward, screaming battle cries in their harsh language, pulling their fallen brother free even as they fought. They carried their wounded back while still firing their weapons. "They are insane," Tellus whispered, watching the battle from the command center. "Why do they not retreat? Why do they not calculate the optimal survival strategy?" Because they did not come here to survive, Kira realized. They came here to save us. The battle raged for hours. The Void Swarm pushed forward with relentless hunger, but the Terrans pushed back with something even more powerful. They fought for every meter of ground, every building, every life. When their advanced weapons ran out of ammunition, they switched to simpler ones. When those failed, they fought with blades and bare hands. Captain Chun coordinated the defense from the Defiant while simultaneously engaging swarm flyers with the ship's weapon systems. She had not slept in 30 hours, but her voice remained steady as she directed the evacuation. Transport 7, you are clear for departure. Transport 8, prepare for loading. Ground forces, begin tactical withdrawal to secondary positions. Captain, we have a problem, reported her first officer. The colony's reactor is destabilizing. If it goes critical, it will destroy everything within 50 kilometers, including our ground forces. Chun did not hesitate. Send a team to stabilize it. Captain, the reactor room is already overrun by the swarm. She stood up from her chair. Then I will lead the team myself. The colonists watched as Captain Chun and a small squad of Terrans descended into the infested lower levels of the colony. They fought through darkness and terror, pushing deeper into the nightmare. Chun was wounded twice during the descent, but she refused medical attention until the mission was complete. In the reactor room, surrounded by Void Swarm creatures, she worked the alien controls with blood-slicked hands. She had never seen Karathi technology before, but she studied it, understood it, and fixed it. The reactor stabilized just as the last of her ammunition ran out. Her team held the room with knives and improvised clubs until reinforcements arrived. By the time the sun rose on Nexus 7, the Void Swarm had been broken. The creatures facing an enemy that refused to flee or surrender had begun to retreat. For the first time in recorded history, the Void Swarm had been defeated not by superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but by will alone. Of the 3,000 colonists on Nexus 7, 2,743 were evacuated safely. The Terran Marines had lost 84 soldiers. 84 humans had given their lives for people they had never met, species they had never seen, a colony that was not their own. The Galactic Council received the news with disbelief. The Karathi Collective demanded an explanation. How had primitive savages accomplished what the combined fleets of the civilized races had deemed impossible? Ambassador Velrix traveled to meet with Captain Chun on the newly secured colony. He found her in the medical bay, sitting beside the beds of her wounded soldiers. She looked exhausted, covered in bandages and dirt, but she rose to greet him with a warrior's dignity. "Captain Chun," Velrix said slowly, "the Council would like to understand why the Terran Navy violated the containment order to intervene in this sector." Chun looked at him with those tired, fierce eyes. "Because someone needed help. But the risk. The cost. Your soldiers died for strangers. That is what soldiers do, Ambassador. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is the definition of our purpose." Velrix struggled to comprehend this. "But your species gains nothing from this action. These colonists are not Terrans. This territory is not yours. By logical calculation, there was no benefit to intervention." Captain Chun smiled sadly and looked at her sleeping soldiers. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about the old Earth, about a time when humans thought they were alone in the universe. We dreamed of meeting other civilizations, advanced beings who had solved the problems we struggled with. We imagined they would be wise and kind." She paused, and her voice grew hard. "When we finally reached the stars and found the Galactic Council, we learned that advanced does not mean wise. Sophisticated does not mean kind. You call yourselves civilized because you have technology and order and logic. But you left 3,000 people to die because saving them was inconvenient." She stood up and faced the ambassador directly. "We Terrans are savages by your standards. We are messy and emotional and violent. We make decisions with our hearts as often as our heads. We rush into danger without calculating the odds. We sacrifice ourselves for those we love, and even for those we do not know." Her voice filled with quiet anger. "But we would never abandon someone who called for help. We would never weigh lives on a scale and decide that some are worth less than others. We would never call ourselves civilized while leaving children to be consumed by monsters." Ambassador Velrix had no response. He returned to the Galactic Council with a report that would shake the foundations of galactic politics. The Terrans had proven something that the enlightened races had forgotten over millions of years of advancement. Civilization was not measured by technology or logic or the ability to calculate optimal outcomes. It was measured by compassion, by sacrifice, by the willingness to stand between the helpless and the darkness. By that measure, the most primitive species in the galaxy was also the most civilized. In the months that followed, Nexus 7 became a symbol. Other species, long ignored by the Galactic Council, began to reach out to humanity. They sought alliance with the savages who answered distress calls, who fought for strangers, who believed that every life had value. The Council watched with growing concern as the Terran influence spread. They had contained a small, aggressive species for a century, but they could not contain an idea. The idea that civilization meant caring for others, not calculating their expendability. Kira Vex eventually traveled to Earth, the first Karathi to set foot on the human homeworld. She walked through their cities and saw their monuments. She noticed that their greatest heroes were not scientists or philosophers or logicians. They were soldiers and doctors and ordinary people who had risked everything to help others. She understood then why humanity was so dangerous to the Galactic Council. It was not their weapons or their aggression. It was their compassion. It was their insane, beautiful belief that every single life was worth fighting for. The civilized races had abandoned Nexus 7 because it was logical. The savages had saved it because it was right. And in the end, the galaxy would have to decide which definition of civilization it wanted to follow.